Well, I wanted to talk this evening about the forces that are unleashed in our time, both positive and negative, and how they affect the choices that we are making day to day in participating in the activities that we've been summoned to participate in. Now, it is exciting that Baha'u'llah told us how creation came into being. Think about a wildflower. Think about a flash of lightning. Think about the stars and the bodies in the vast space of our universe. All of that creation, where did it come from? And Baha'u'llah tells us the force that brought it into being is the Word of God. The Word of God had the power to bring this creation from nothingness into being. And that force of power of the Word of God was also given to the manifestations. And so when Baha'u'llah appeared, the greatest manifestation in the history of humanity, superior in power and knowledge to all the others, at one with them in spirit and servitude to God. When Baha'u'llah came, he brought that power of the Word of God, that force. And we ask ourselves, what became of it? How is it that a manifestation of God founds a world civilization, starting in a dark feudal society like Iran, going to prison from Baghdad and Constantinople to the most straight prison in Akka? How does those events found a world civilization? What is the process? We know that when the sun shines, the vegetable world of our planet creates a miracle. Somehow in their green leaves, the plants create through photosynthesis the power of growth, which feeds the planet. We know what the name of that is, but it really is a miracle that the sun should fall on these plants and create life. Well, when Baha'u'llah spoke, when he walked by the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers and wrote the hidden words, when he answered the Bab's uncle's questions and wrote the Kitab-i-Iqan, he was not simply writing words. He was releasing into the world a spiritual force, a power. We have powers in the physical world that we can't see, that are invisible. Magnetism is one. You can put the magnet under the paper and watch the iron filings change shape and direction. So there are physical forces which are invisible, which we accept as reality. Also, there are spiritual forces, powerful spiritual forces, which are responsible for the movement of human civilization from the caves to the cities to the creation of the architecture of the East and the West. That is the power of the Word of God. Now, when this power comes to us, where does it alight? how does it affect us? Well, think back in your own minds. Which stories have affected you? Which things have touched and changed your hearts? I'll tell you one of mine. Baha'u'llah said in the Kitab-i-Iqan that words lose their meaning with the decline of religion. As religion falls into decay, the words that it talks about become hollow. Words like love, like compassion, like wisdom, lose their meaning. And then he said it is through the power of the deeds of the dawnbreakers that such words as patience and steadfastness have gained meaning again. Well, what do we need in this day? Many things. But one thing we need is courage. We are asked to turn away from the decadent pleasures and pastimes and distractions of our society and turn towards a very different life. Courage. Where did that word regain its meaning? To me, it was the mother of Ashraf. When the bloodbath was happening in Iran and the Babis were being slaughtered and tortured and executed, one day the mob came to the house of Ashraf and took her son. And she could hear the drums beating and people screaming, and she could imagine what their thirst for violence would do. And suddenly, a couple of them came back. They came to her house. They said, "Come, we have your son. Tell him to deny his faith in the Bab, and he will be free, and he will be given everything this world can offer." And so she left her house, and she went to the square, and she saw the screaming mob, and she said, "My son, my beloved son, let not this opportunity pass from your days. This is your chance to prove by your death your belief in the Bab. Go thou straight on in the service of your Lord." For me, courage came back into the world by that example. So the force of the religion, of the words of the manifestation, come heart by heart by heart into being. And they change the heart so that the virtues spoken of by the manifestation come into being in human life. Courage, wisdom, compassion, forgiveness, power. All these things were reborn into human life through the hearts of the Babis and the Baha'is. What does that have to do with founding a world civilization? Very much. It has very much to do with that, because it shows us the beginning phase of the transformation of the planet. The beginning phase being heart by heart individuals. And then the Guardian said, as the force continues, it crystallizes, it's a chemical term, into institutions which have the capacity to change the world. I can remember when The Guardian was introducing to us the institutions of the administrative order. And when I went to a summer school or wherever, there would be Baha'is who were saying, "What is all this administration? We don't need those things, voting, elections." Abdu'l-Baha just loved us. He didn't bring this kind of organization. Well, Shoghi Effendi explained, the Master gave to the North American continent the tablets of the divine plan. He called on the Baha'is here to go around the world to every island and mountain and sea, every country, every territory, and bring the word of God, and bring it with a pure heart and an illumined conscience. He called for that. And this administrative order that we were building was the channel, the organization, the network that would make it possible for the Baha'is to do that. And so committees were formed by the NSAs, conferences were held, and a tremendous spirit of excitement gathered the Baha'is together in 1953 for the first international conference. And there stood Ruhiyyih Khanum, the first time we had seen Mary Maxwell since she left and was married in the Holy Land. And she read the tablet from Shoghi Effendi that began the 10-year crusade. Go to Alaska, go to Colombia, go to Sri Lanka, go to all these names of African countries that we couldn't recognize, Botswana, Swaziland. She read those names, and a spirit of excitement went out into the audience. Remember individual initiative? The believers rose up, they came to the stage, and one would say, "I'll go to Ghana." And another one says, "I'll go anywhere." And a lady said, "I'll go, but George, are you out there, George? Is this okay?" She was volunteering and she didn't know where her husband was. There was a heart response to this summons of Shoghi Effendi. And how could we have known that in 1957 we would lose him? No other group of people would have the honor and privilege of responding to a call from the sign of God on earth. It was a priceless opportunity. And so in 1963, with the first Universal House of Justice standing on the stage in front of us in London, we looked around the room, and there were the Knights of Baha'u'llah, and together with them were the native believers who had come from the Philippines or the Montevideo Islands. It was a glorious image. It was so beautiful that on the last day, Ruhiyyih Khanum spoke for 2 hours about the life of Shoghi Effendi. She gave us every memory. She gave us every suffering. She gave us every aspiration that Shoghi Effendi had shared with her. It was so touching. At one place she stopped and began to weep. She couldn't continue. And where was that, friends? That was close to the end, when she was telling us that in the last year of his life, Shoghi Effendi went back to visit the places in Switzerland where he had gone after the passing of Abdu'l-Baha, places which brought him joy and comfort and consolation and a feeling of refuge. And she didn't say this, but I thought it is as though Shoghi Effendi, knowing his end was near, went back to those places that had brought him relief and a sense of safety. And he was saying goodbye. He was saying goodbye to the parts of this world that he had loved. Now, the House of Justice that we saw spent years to define a constitution to show how the House of Justice would operate. And this constitution gave us words and images of how the infallibility of the Universal House of Justice would operate. The Guardian had told us they were infallible. Abdu'l-Baha's will had told us they were infallible. And now they offered us their constitution so that we could see how it would operate. And they began to give us plans, as Shoghi Effendi had given to the different NSAs of the world teaching plans. And these plans were somehow familiar. Their language was beautiful. The spirit of love reached through the words and touched your heart. The goals were similar to those that Shoghi Effendi had set before us. And with the help of the Hands of the Cause, we rallied around and we followed those plans. And then I think it was in 1991 or 1995, a change came. You know, for every spiritual triumph, there are tests. There is no spiritual progress without tests. A letter from the Universal House of Justice to the Counselors Conference describing clusters and activities and keeping statistics. Now, just imagine me, a lover of Shoghi Effendi and of the Hands, of the beautiful language and spirit. And I was reading about core activities, study circles, devotional meetings. I could not relate to it. It was a great test for me. I was missing the voice of Shoghi Effendi. I was missing a sense of spirituality, a fragrance of illumination. And I, frankly, didn't know what to do. I prayed, I went to the conferences, I wrote letters, and gradually, I began to understand whatever I could understand about the meaning of these plans and the difference between them and what we had had before. They referred to the condition of humanity in this day. This was a response to the conditions of human life around the planet. Now, let me read you what Shoghi Effendi said. This is from The Guardian. We cannot segregate the human heart from the environment outside us and say that once one of these is reformed, everything will be improved. Man is organic with the world. His inner life molds the environment and is itself also deeply affected by it. The one acts upon the other, and every abiding change in the life of man is the result of these mutual reactions. The environment. So I thought about my environment, and I came to realize that I live in a corrupt and material civilization. I live in a land dominated by unbridled capitalism, which has drenched the people of this land in materialism and consumerism. Can I separate myself from this influence? Not according to The Guardian. It affects me. The ads, the picture of Jackie Kennedy's pearls, it is a bombardment telling you to buy something. You need something. You're not complete without something. How effective is it? It has transformed American society from what I can remember in my teenage years into a consuming mass. People who have gone into debt far beyond what they can hope to repay. That did not exist when I was growing up. It is powerful. Now, I'm a psychologist, so let me tell you one little bit. There was a psychologist working in brain research in Italy, and he was studying the brain of a monkey, and he put electrodes there, and it would show on a screen which part of the monkey's brain lit up when you gave it a banana. And he was tracking this and timing and describing it when an assistant walked in, and the man put electrodes on his brain, and lo and behold, the same part of his brain got busy when he watched the monkey eat the banana. More research was done. It was found that we have mirror neurons. We have some cells in our brain which give us the experience of what we're looking at in other people. What am I looking at? Television. Goldman Sachs is collapsing. Governor Sanford went to Brazil to find another woman. All of this bombardment of news is registering on my brain. Beyond that, the attitude of the broadcaster is affecting me. Is she frantic? Is she blasé, announcing the death of women and children in Iraq? Whatever he or she is recording in my brain. And so, Shoghi Effendi warned us in his last letter to the American believers, beware lest timidity, apathy, and complacency rob you of the service that you could perform. Part of my tests in coping with these new plans was to learn that I had timidity, I had apathy, and I had complacency. Timidity. They say teach directly about Baha'u'llah. When I was growing up, nobody who was smart believed in religion. We believed in Freud and Darwin and Sartre. And to believe in religion was to be mentally retarded. So I would discuss the social teachings of the faith and win everybody's admiration. But to say Baha'u'llah is a manifestation of God would have made me an outcast and a curiosity. And that timidity had followed me. I found it out doing book 6 when we sort of analyzed how we felt about teaching. Apathy. I sat before my television and watched the news, and I noticed that during the first year of the war in Iraq, I was shocked and horrified and upset at the civilian deaths. And now, in the 3rd year, I watched it. I didn't have those feelings. I just watched it like a dead person because it was horrible, but there was nothing I could do about it. There wasn't any way that I could respond. And therefore, my emotions had been anesthetized. I watched it in a state of apathy, complacency. Well, I looked back at my service as a youth. I thought, my goodness, I say my prayers, I go to feasts, I give to the fund. What more can I do? What else is there? Besides, the American Baha'is are blessed, and we're going to go on in great glory. That is complacency. So into my life came these burning letters from the Universal House of Justice, whereas I could not stand to look at the face of the world seriously on my daily news. The Universal House of Justice on the mountain of God looked at the whole earth. Every suffering, starving, burning bit of humanity had their attention. And they could respond, and they did respond with these plans that were so difficult for me to swallow. They did respond. They gave a global plan to the Baha'is of the world, which brought them in immediate contact with what? The Word of God, the source of power, the power of Baha'u'llah to change the world. They brought devotional meetings where we turn away from the squalid and the ugly and the unjust and turn our souls towards God, towards kindness, towards spiritual power. And we take some responsibility for the future of humanity. We educate the children, and we empower the youth. And as we do this, we are in motion. And because we are in motion, we are less battered by the negative forces around us. In 1952, Marguerite Sears, the wife of Bill Sears, went on pilgrimage in the fall to the presence of Shoghi Effendi. And when she came back, she was a changed woman. In the first place, she was going to pioneer in Africa. But in the second place, she was just different. Her attitude was different. And she told us what Shoghi Effendi said one night at the dining table. he said to her, in the future, the negative forces will become more and more powerful. The negative forces will be like a hurricane storming, and you must find your way to the center of the hurricane. Many believers will be swept away. You must find your way to the center where it is quiet and it is calm. And the faith you have one day will not be sufficient for the next day. You must constantly deepen, or you will be at the mercy of these storming negative forces. So Marguerite's pilgrim note is always in my mind, and I can see that when the House of Justice sends us to study classes to read the Word of God, they are sending us to the center of the hurricane. When they ask us to do services for children and youth, they are beckoning us to use the power of our faith for the future of humanity. So this is how I have come to envision the plan of the Universal House of Justice. And when I hear a lecture, as I did, brilliant lecture about climate change around the world, and the expert says we have to have a vast grassroots movement in order to counter the forces that are generating climate change. I see that the House of Justice has designed what is necessary for humanity, a grassroots movement all around the world, every country where we read the Word of God, the Spirit of Baha'u'llah. It means a great deal to me to be able to share these thoughts with you, and I thank you for your attention and your patience.